Welcome to War Room, the official podcast of the U.S. Army War College online journal, graciously supported by the Army War College Foundation. Please join the conversation at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. We hope you enjoy the program.
Welcome to A Better Peace, the War Room podcast. I'm Jacqueline Whitt, Professor of Strategy at the U.S. Army War College and the War Room podcast editor. I'm so glad you've joined us for this episode, which continues our ongoing series in Perspectives on Senior Leadership. Today we're privileged to have as our guest Admiral John Richardson, the current Chief of Naval Operations, or CNO. Admiral Richardson is the 31st to hold this position, which is the highest ranking in the U.S. Navy, and he has held this post since 2015. Admiral Richardson was commissioned in 1982 after graduating from the U.S. Naval Academy. He has spent most of his career with the submarine force and has commanded at every level. Additionally, he has served as Chief of Staff for Naval Forces Europe and Naval Forces Africa, and before assuming the role of CNO, was the director of the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Program. So welcome to the War Room, Admiral Richardson.
It's great to be here. Thanks very much.
Great. So we've asked you on the podcast to talk with us about senior leadership and your perspectives on that. So I'll start with a question about the strategic leaders or the senior leaders who you most admire, whether those are civilian or military, historical or contemporary.
I'll tell you what, I've always been a fan of General George Washington. First, as a general, I thought he executed the campaign for our nation's independence, very, very skillfully, and he was having to balance a number of things. The aims of the campaign were changing throughout the war for independence. The resourcing that was supplied to his army was, running hot and cold all the time. Less than optimal, exactly. And and he was fighting in this environment where it was, even the domestic population was highly uncertain and split in terms of where their loyalties were. Throughout that, and he was fighting, perhaps the finest military in the world at that time, and so. But I thought that over the course of the campaign, just from a military perspective, he exploited, the interior lines that he had. He exploited the distance over which the British Army would have to travel, and in the end, he made fewer mistakes and took advantage of his adversaries' mistakes to the point that he culminated the campaign in victory. But perhaps the thing that kind of demands the most respect in my mind is that, of course, we know he went on from that role to become the first president of the United States. And by virtue of his victory in the War of Independence and his role as our first president, I think that he could have done anything he wanted in terms of leading our nation. And he chose to walk away. He chose to double down on this idea of democracy and step away, realizing that his time was done, and allow for the democratic process from this nascent constitution to exercise itself and elect a new president. And so I think that that humility, and he always had a sense of humility in his interaction with political leaders. I thought that was something that's very admirable. From a maritime perspective, I'd have to say that I'm a great fan of Nelson and Nimitz, who both, I think, had the same sort of attributes, which was they were able to articulate their commander's guidance and bring their subordinate commanders on board in a way that provided, I guess, the operational and psychological safety to experiment, to go out there and achieve their full potential, to be creative, and do so in a way that the price for failure wasn't going to be kind of a no-go situation. And I think that both Nelson at Trafalgar and in those campaigns, Nimitz throughout the campaign in the Pacific, that creativity by their subordinate commanders, which flourished in the environment that they set, was key and decisive in their victory.
Great. So I think you've given us some examples from across a range of time periods, across a range of sort of strategic context, but you've identified a few attributes that you think are really critical for strategic leaders. When you think about Navy leaders more broadly, the type of leaders that you're looking for in today's Navy, in the 21st century Navy, what kind of characteristics are you looking for in those leaders who are coming up today?
Yeah, so we've articulated in a document we call a Design for Maintaining Maritime Superiority, 4 core attributes that are important not only for our leaders but everybody in the Navy. And so it's these attributes of integrity and toughness and accountability and initiative. And so those 4 are, and we could go on for the entire podcast talking about the details of those 4 attributes. With respect to leadership, as articulated in our leader development framework, I would say that we definitely want leaders that know how to win, right? At the end of the day, you've got to be winning, particularly as we think about competition, great power competition, returning as a dynamic in our current security environment. We want to be not just competing, but we want to be winning that competition. So make no mistake about that. The recipe or the road to that victory for leaders, the road to achieving that level of leadership, we describe as having 2 lanes. One is very familiar to all of us. It is the road of being competent, an expert indeed at what you do, right? So you've got to know your business. Whether you're at junior levels of leadership, we expect technical competence in your warfighting area, all the way up to strategic leadership. There's another lane in the road, though, which I think captures the importance of character, right? And so we do want these leaders to be the type of people that, through their character, will inspire trust and confidence up and down the chain of command, and trust and confidence between the Navy or any service and the nation which we're sworn to protect.
Great. So if we think about those 4 qualities, those 4 characteristics of integrity, toughness, accountability, and initiative, can you talk to us a little bit about how you envision leaders developing those qualities or characteristics?
Sure. We're blessed, actually, in the military to have a lot of very robust ways through which we can develop those attributes. One is we have a really great system of schools, don't we? I mean, here we are at the Army War College.
I'd like to think so. Right?
Yeah, and you're a professor of strategy here in Carlisle, and so by virtue of, and that education starts early, right? I mean, as soon as you join, whether
right.
you're an officer program or enlisted, first thing you do is go to school. You start learning. So that's one way, is through a terrific system of schools, both training and education. I would say that there's also a very robust kind of on-the-job training program in all of our services. So there's a system of qualifications. There's a system of both in watch standing and for positions in our services. So, for instance, you can, in the Navy, you can qualify for a specific watch station, or at some point you're going to qualify for department head and then command and so on and so forth. So there's this on-the-job element that builds these attributes as well. And then finally, what we try and encourage, and I know the Army's there with us, is this robust and kind of fervent atmosphere of self-learning, right? Where we want to be insatiable readers, insatiable learners. While we do have a great system of schools, we're not going to wait for that system. We're going to get right after diving in and finding the appropriate references and learning about whatever challenge faces us.
Some other pieces of advice on that last piece in particular? So the Navy or the Army, they're going to send you to school. They're going to give you assignments. They're going to give you some of that on-the-job training.
Right.
When it comes to self-development, you talked about reading. What are some of the other ways that, say, young officers or young enlisted personnel, or even mid-career senior folks
Right.
can continue that self-development process.
So certainly there is there's a tremendous amount of literature out there that you can just read, and I'm a big fan of the saying, hey, if you want to get a new idea, read an old book. If you really dig into the history, there are not too many problems that we're confronting today that haven't been confronted in some form in our past. It may not be exactly the same, but the major features are probably present. You have to find the right histories. You want those histories that will transport you back as vividly as possible, so that it's not some kind of a 20/20 hindsight. Of course, it was all going to turn out well.
Fools they were.
Yeah. So you want to try and get a history that allows you to appreciate all of the uncertainty that existed at the time, how the leader wrestled with that uncertainty and made important decisions in the face of uncertain and incomplete information. So that's the reading part. I will tell you also that I'm a huge fan of connections. And so in addition to the literature, most people, me included, have sort of a great network of mentors, right? People who have gone down these roads before us and are still with us. And I've found them to be very generous with their time and their insights. And so that would be another way in terms of just teaching yourself. Hey, make sure you're staying connected. Again, if you have a problem, there's probably somebody else who's had a chance to wrestle with that problem in the near past, or even maybe is wrestling with it now. Reaching out to your peers, your fellow commanders, if you will, reaching out to those who have gone before you, I think is another way to really teach yourself to confront these challenges as they come.
Great. What about advice if you are the mentor? How do you envision, say, officers at the 05 or 06 level developing some of the officers who work for them, some of the enlisted, junior enlisted or NCOs who work for them?
Right. Well, a couple of things that I'll answer that question on a couple of different scales. One, if you're a mentor, and I hope that everybody from at least 05 and senior, you're probably a mentor to a few people. And as I've had these conversations with our leadership, most people have trouble mentoring more than, a dozen people. I mean, it's just so...
Even that feels like a lot.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, exactly. And so, but even within that, that posse of proteges, right, that you've got as a mentor, let's say that there's 12 just for discussion purposes, I always advocate that those mentors try and do their best to ensure that is a diverse group, right? That as they look at their proteges, their mentees, that they've got different, upbringings, diversity of thought, diversity of ethnicity, you name it, whatever dimension of diversity you can think about, try and make your group of proteges, mentees, as diverse as possible. And then on kind of the person-to-person level, the best mentors I've had they've never really sort of given me the answer, but they've asked those great tantalizing questions that caused me to think about different areas of the decision space that I hadn't thought of before. And so it's, really a matter of asking the right questions to tease the learning out of the protege, the mentee. And so I think the combination of both of those is what really constitutes, a good mentoring environment. I would just, if I could, say one more thing. Moving beyond mentorship to advocacy, right? And so I would say that, being a mentor is a kind of a personal relationship, a deeply personal relationship. You become committed to the person that you're mentoring. You have skin in the game, but it is personal. And so this idea of advocacy moves that relationship beyond just the personal one-on-one out to the broader arena. And so an advocate now is always scanning the horizon for opportunities for their protege, right? Actively searching. So if a particular job opening or an opportunity pops up, that advocate will call make an overt action to say, hey, look, as you're considering to the person who's going to fill that spot, as you're considering all of the candidates, I just want you to be aware that I have the perfect candidate for that job, right? I know them well. They're one of my proteges, my mentees. They are perfectly suited for that opportunity. The combination of this advocacy and this diversity of your body of mentees will serve to, I think, put diversity in important positions around our military, which is becoming, more conclusively decisive in terms of building a team that is creative and seeing all the angles on a particular problem. And I think it's more important the more strategic the questions become.
Right. No, I think that relationship between the diversity of the team, the answers that you get, the sort of team that you build, and the idea that might start with sort of mentoring relationships is a really, really important one. If we could turn to thinking about your own experiences at the strategic level as a senior leader, I'd like for you to think about a personal leadership challenge that has sort of shaped the way you think about leadership and leadership in the Navy in particular today, and maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Well, one thing that has just continued to hit me, and my thinking is always developing on this, is really, I would say that this sort of starts at the major command level, right? So as I think about, an officer's career in particular, there are a couple of, well, for the most part, it's a linear progression. You get your next job is you get increased responsibility and that sort of thing, but it's just kind of a bigger version of the one before it. But there are a number of inflection points in a career that I think are different in nature, right? And so, the first one might be the transition from your student life as a young person to a leader life. Right? That's a big transition. You're no longer worried about your grades and your self-development. You're now worried about your team, and that is different in nature, right? I would say that from there, the next major leap is to command. When you are first put in command, sort of the finality, the ownership that comes with command is different in nature than any of the subordinate positions. The other one that is where your question starts to really be relevant is in major command, which is a bit more strategic than unit command, right? And so now two things about major command. One, you're commanding commanders, right, which is different than just commanding a unit. And then also you're commanding at a distance, right? So you're not living with your unit.
Right, that move from direct sort of leadership to indirect.
Exactly. So and this is where we start to train our strategic thinking, right? Because as you move up from there, if you're successful in major command, they're going to give you more, and you're going to get a bigger team, which is even more indirect. And yet you're going to be accountable and responsible for leading that team appropriately, properly, effectively. And so how do you get a sense for these bigger and bigger organizations that have to achieve bigger and bigger goals? Well, it is about that team that you assemble around you, right? And how do you ensure that team is giving you a full map of the decision space that you're going to have to navigate as you move this organization forward? And so I would say that in those areas where I would feel pretty good about the decisions that we've made, it's because we had a really great representation of all of the space, all of the aspects of that decision. And we therefore made a fully informed decision. Where I've kind of been disappointed in myself in terms of leading the Navy, it's because some part of that decision space was dark to me, right? It was blind. I was blind to it, and therefore made a decision that was not fully informed, was somehow incomplete, inconsiderate of that particular dimension. And it was because, that whatever the team was, it had either changed and some part was missing that was there before, or the team was just that I put together was just not adequate to the task. And so there is this really important aspect of making sure, hey, you're not going to lead it directly. You're going to lead it through people now. Who are those people, and are they giving you a full appreciation of the whole system?
Sure, because your team now is about as big as you could imagine if you're leading the Navy, right?
Right.
What are some of the ways you mitigate against those blind spots or those sort of opaque areas?
Right. So one is you've got to, a lot of dialogue, right? And I probably could be accused of kind of being over collaborative. And so if you've got a major decision that you've got to make at some point in time, between now and that time, there's going to be a phase of the decision making and you becoming aware of all the aspects of the decision that's going to be kind of like an expansion, right? You're going to get a lot of people bringing a lot of different aspects of that decision. You're going to be asking a lot of different questions of your team. And so you can see this, this decision space being mapped out. Right. And if you do that well, you get a complete picture. And therefore, you reach a point where, okay, now it's time to converge because we actually have to decide to do something here. What are the aspects that we're going to take into account? What are the priorities? And you get this convergence towards the decision point. Right. So how do you get that expansion to be as complete as you can be? A lot of it goes back to a lot of communication, right? You've got to create this environment where everybody on your team feels very free to paint out part of that decision space. And it may not be the most relevant part, it almost might be irrelevant, but it's important that they feel empowered to contribute to the conversation. And then who do you have telling you stuff, right? It kind of goes back to our diversity discussion. If everybody on my team is like me, well, I'm going to get kind of a one-dimensional, perspective on that decision landscape. And so you really need a lot of different perspectives from a lot of different places that will, shine light into your blind spots and make sure that whole space is illuminated. So the combination of, I guess it's inclusion and diversity would hopefully give you the full map. And I think everybody's pretty smart, right? And you're a professor, so you can check me there. Maybe everybody's not. But most of the people that I deal with are pretty smart. And if they're presented, all of the factors with the decision, generally will come to a way forward that's acceptable and productive.
Good. If I could ask you to think about 2 specific days or sort of kinds of days, and that would be you as a strategic leader, so at the highest levels of leadership, what's been your worst day and your best day, or what the characteristics of the worst day and the best day? Yeah.
I got to say that I've just sort of been at this long enough, Jackie, that when somebody will often come in and say, hey, I've got some bad news for you, or hey, so I've got some good news for you. And at this point, it's like, look, there's no bad and good news. There is just news, right? And so anything that keeps the Navy and the nation, the joint force, our contribution to the joint force, moving in a productive direction that's all really that I can hope to do. And so we've identified, a strategic end. We've got a path to that end, at least a hypothesis of a path. And so we start marching down, and we're sensing as we go. And there'll be news. Some of it'll kind of keep us moving down that path. I guess that's good news or better news. And some of it's going to knock us off that path or set us back. And, that's not so good news. So it all starts to become, in my mind, as a non-emotional and systemic as I can make it as I lead the Navy forward. But there are some things that I would say characterize good days anyway, and that's when you see the people around you succeeding. And so I've tried to be a person who empowers and promotes and allows other people to succeed, to see them develop and challenge them with new opportunities, put them into opportunities where they can succeed, higher and higher stakes, watch them play the game at that level. And when I see that, people moving beyond maybe even what they thought they could do, and doing well, succeeding. To watch that manifest itself within them, I would say that those are great days.
Great, that's really helpful. I like the sort of reframing of what counts as good and bad.
Yeah.
And how we think about that can affect the way we move forward. All right, this is the last question. This is my favorite one as a professor and a lifelong sort of reader and lover of books. But is there something that you're reading right now that you would recommend to our readers, that they add to their reading list or they add to their sort of nightstand?
Sure. I would say that the books I'm reading right now, or have just recently read, and I would also advocate that you go to the CNO's reading list. And so,
it was well done.
Yeah, yeah, nice segue there. And I've got an inability to squeeze the list down. So there's probably 150 books on the reading list. So beware.
Just a couple months.
Beware. Fine. Yeah. But I would say the ones that have captured my imagination recently would be, there's a book by Professor Hess from the University of Virginia. It's called Humility is the New Smart. And it's about, he's not talking about religious humility in this context. He talks about professional humility, the idea that even as a leader, you're not going to be the sole owner of all the greatest ideas. And but he casts this in the current environment where, a lot of what defined authority in the past, the ability to work with numbers, the ability to manage a lot of data in your head, that's all being done by machines and artificial intelligence now. Much faster,
more efficiently.
Exactly. So what are the competitive advantages? Well, their creativity, their innovation, their ability to team together. This idea of leadership in the smart machine age is, I think, a very, very powerful one. The other one that is terrific right now is this book by Trent Hone called Learning War, and it's about the U.S. Navy between 1895 and 1945, and the complex adaptive system that was started when we formed our war college, right, with Alfred Thayer Mahan and Luce and Sims and all of those insurgents, Mr. Hone calls them, that said, hey, we've sort of reached our continental boundaries as a nation right now. It's late 1800s. And so for us as a nation to continue to prosper, we're going to have to go offshore, overseas, to international markets. What sort of Navy is needed for this new strategic direction the nation has to take? And then what sort of officer corps is required to lead that Navy? And that framed a whole new set of questions. And those questions were explored and answered by our War College up in Newport. Those are the types of questions I'm sure you'll explore and answer here at the Army War College. And then as we went through, the stand-up of the War College, World War I, and then the interwar period up in Newport, resulting in War Plan Orange, and then not just stopping there, but also the conduct of the war itself, how the Navy continued to learn as a system from the strategic down to the tactical. That book really captures that very, very well.
Excellent. So
I could give you 6 more if you want. I mean, yeah.
maybe we'll do that in a second. Or I would like to know those at least. I'd like to thank you for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with before we sign off? Well,
I'll tell you, it's a privilege to be up here at the Army War College. It's my second visit here. I look forward to the time with the audience. It's a conversation that I hope to inspire because, as I said, I'm listening as much as I am transmitting these days. And particularly an institution like this, which performs at the absolute highest levels of its business, but from a little bit different perspective than the one I marinate in every day.
Right.
I think this is an invaluable opportunity, and I want to thank you also for giving me the time to talk to you today.
Great, absolutely. It's been my pleasure.
And that concludes our program. Thank you for listening. The views expressed in this podcast reflect those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views, policies, or positions of the U.S. Army or the Department of Defense. Let us know what you think. Provide us your feedback, comments, or suggestions through our webpage at warroom.armywarcollege.edu, and have a great day.